My next guest is David K. Richards. David's life mission is to help changemakers usher in new paradigms for learning and leadership. He is the founder and CEO of Changemaker Microschools, a network of innovative, love-based microschools. He also coaches leaders through his Wise Warrior program and podcast, Changemaker ED. He has worked in education reform for over 25 years as a teacher, principal, and founder of several innovative schools with nationally recognized Summit Public Schools and Growth Public Schools. David has dedicated his life to helping people of all ages connect with a powerful leader within themselves. David lives in Sacramento, California with his wife and two children. He holds a BA from UC Berkeley and an MA from Stanford University. Well, welcome to the podcast, David.
Thanks, Dana. It's great to be here.
Well, we'll start off with the question asked everybody. Tell me about a time when you were in the trenches and managed to crawl out.
Yeah, so I had mentioned Summit Public Schools, and I started with that charter school organization. I taught in traditional public schools for a bit and then moved over to the charter school world. And when I started at Summit Public Schools, it was one school at the back of a parking lot. We had taken over the big high school's tennis court, and that was a whole controversy. But we just had some portables at the back, and we were a small charter school with a big vision. And what ended up happening was we grew really fast. We got really successful and we grew very quickly, which was a great opportunity for me because I went from founding teacher to helping open up schools 2, 3, and 4, and then training everybody how to open schools, all the principals on 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And so it was a whirlwind of craziness. And as you know, even when I was in the classroom, I was already starting to reach burnout, right? Because I taught for 7 years. And I don't think I missed a day in those. I think I missed like half a day. I actually know this. I missed half a day to buy my house for the 7 years I was a teacher. So I never missed a day, which is not really very healthy,
Mm-hmm.
And then I moved into the principal role, straight from the classroom to principal of a brand new school in an urban area in East San Jose of California. Then I moved, like I said, and then I started training everybody, and we were opening schools across the whole Bay Area. So I was driving, I was in the car 5, 6, 7 hours a day, always on the phone. And my life had just reached such a point of exhaustion that
Mm-hmm.
I had a physical breakdown. I ended up with Bell's palsy, which is a facial paralysis. And it wasn't just the Bell's palsy. It was like I was completely exhausted. My children were 1 and 3 at the time. And I honestly could not get out of bed for, it was like 3 or 4 months where I had to take a leave of absence from the
Wow.
school. And it was just a complete physical and emotional breakdown. And my body just basically said, you can't do this anymore. You
Mm-hmm.
can't go at this pace and you need to take a break. So the universe put me on timeout, I always say, for 3 or 4 months. And then through that 3 or 4 month period, I really started to reflect on what am I doing here and what are my priorities, young children and how I'm using my time. And I felt like it was time to make some really drastic changes. And that's when I started deep practice in mindfulness and meditation. And that's what really helped me.
Yeah, I mean, I've taught a lot of people who went through something where they were burning themselves out, but for you, like you said, working your way up from founding the schools and being a founding teacher to superintendent and then driving so many hours to these various locations, I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, it's no wonder this
Exactly.
neurological
Yeah.
um, symptoms happened, right? And then um, was it difficult to even find out what was happening, or did you get a diagnosis pretty quick?
Interestingly enough, Bell's palsy, they don't know why it happens. They have some research that shares that it may be like a virus caused by a viral infection,
Okay.
but really the medical community doesn't know. And I believe that it's, like I said, it's just exhaustion and overworking. It's like there's something going on within your system that it just manifests as Bell's palsy. So I did get the diagnosis pretty quickly. The funny thing was I went to the ER. Well, it's not funny. I remember the moment that my wife thought I was having a stroke because my eye was, my whole face was kind of frozen and my eye was stuck open. And so I could see that look of horror in her eyes of like, oh my gosh, I could be raising these kids by myself. And that was the moment that I was like, wow, something has to change. And then I went to the ER. And the funny part of the story is the person at the front desk is like, oh, you have Bell's palsy. Like the woman taking the intake, just taking my name down knew immediately. She's like, I've seen this before. Don't freak out. You're probably fine, but let's see what the doctor says. So that was helpful.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, yeah. And then just taking that time to work your way out of that basically physical breakdown into being able to discover mindfulness? Had you done any mindfulness beforehand?
No, I had never, it's so funny. I had bought a book called Meditation or something like that in college, which would have been, 20 years before I ever sat down and meditated. And so I had never done anything around mindfulness meditation, but it was kind of something that I had always desired, right? I had always kind of thought this could be interesting. And I ended up taking a parenting course with my wife right around the time that I had this breakdown, right, like a few months before. And I think
Yeah.
it was connected because the course was really, it was about parenting, but it was a woman who's a child psychologist and a life coach. So it was really about parenting, but her whole message was parenting is about, like, it comes from the inside out. So you have to really examine what's going on within yourself. It's just like teaching, right? Like, energy are you bringing into the space, and how are you judging your kid and, punishing. It was a really transformative course that we did online with my wife. And she asked you to really look deep within yourself to see what are some of the issues. And I think that's what really got me on the path. And one of the things she said was that she said, you have to meditate every single day if you want to be in this course. That was her mandate from day one. She said, it doesn't matter if it's 2 minutes or 20 minutes or 5 minutes, but you have to sit in silence with your eyes closed for a short period of time every single day. And it's going to change your life. And she was absolutely right.
Was it difficult for you to get into the habit of meditation?
Oh, extremely difficult. Extremely difficult. I mean, my nervous system was so on overdrive, and it was just complete. I could not. I'm very ADD. I know a lot of principals. I think every principal I meet, it's like, I'm kind of ADD too. I think we choose that role of being a school leader because it's so action packed and you're moving around and there's never a dull moment. And so for me to sit still is it was, almost 10 years ago, virtually impossible. Now I'm quite good at it. But yeah, it was really hard to begin the practice. And I appreciated what she said, though. My teacher, she basically said, I'm not giving you any kind of method or type, we're not going to give you any kind of, like, you have to do it this way. Because her point was, the moment you do that, you start getting into your mind and it should be this way and the outcomes, and I'm not doing it right. And you kind of start judging yourself. And she just said, sit quietly for a couple minutes a day, do it every day. And then she would lead us in a guided meditation every week. So there was it was a year-long course. Tuesday was her lecture, and it was online. She's actually in New York. And Thursday was the meditation. So every Tuesday and Thursday, we had time to sit and meditate as a group. And then she would spend 30 minutes reading from different sacred texts and different things like that to kind of ground you in something bigger than yourself.
So definitely following something through a whole year got you really into living that life more grounded and
Yeah.
changing really how you thought about things. So let's talk a little bit about some of your schools that you helped find within the charter organization. Um, really kind of what I don't know, some of the strategies are also around advertising when you were opening or helping to open new locations.
Yeah. Yeah. So I opened, like I said, I think it was 8 or 9. Number 10 was my own school. So I opened 9 schools with some public schools. And then I helped out as a board member with academies, which is a dual immersion, which I think we had talked about. And my school number 10 was my own school when I realized that I needed to really slow things down. I know it sounds crazy. I'm going to go open my one school, but it seemed so much easier than what I was up against with my other role of trying to oversee, 10 of them. And so I ended up opening the one school and found that, people really will follow a mission and a vision that is, like, it's based on common sense. So what I did to get students to come to my new school, so I went from being, an executive with an assistant and, leading meetings of 100 people to quitting my job and starting my own school from scratch. So I was sitting in conversations like these with parents at Starbucks and just saying, like, here's what I believe is best for children. And here's what I believe is, best for teachers. And here's what I believe is best for everybody. And just sharing like a vision and the core values. And when you really believe that and you have that clear, then people start to say, like, they do a lot of, head nodding, and they start to follow what you're saying, because I think we all know there's a lot of problems with education. And so when you start to share some solutions, people are like, yes, yes, we want to jump on board with that, and we want to help out, and we want our kid to experience this. So it's not as hard as you think once you get really clear on your vision and your values.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Talk a little bit about your board member experience as well, as it being a nonprofit board and how the board is involved in the launching of the school.
Yeah, so because I had spent all that time, launching schools as a teacher, principal, and assistant superintendent, I joined a board of a friend of mine who has it's still around. It's called Voices. It's called Voices Academies, Voices College Bound Language Academies. I can't remember if they changed their name, but either way, I was the board chair. I started out as a board member and then I became a board chair because they were going from 1 to 5 schools. And I was like, oh, I got you. Like, I can help you with this. And what I did as that board member is I really helped them think through what are the core, like what's the secret sauce that you can
Yeah.
replicate? Because as we know, schools are not like franchise models. You can't just, say this is another McDonald's, this is the parking lots here, the Big Macs there. It's really about the culture. And so what I learned from opening all those schools is that you have to be really intentional with your culture. And so I helped as a board member, I helped them think through what is the part of your culture that you want that's like really special and you want to replicate it. And, taking a teacher to a principal or somebody who's already been one of the schools or an assistant principal, like somebody who really understands the culture and what makes the school great. Because if you're ready to replicate your school in the charter world, that means that you've done something really well because you're doing well and people want, people, there's like waiting lists and people want more schools like this. So you have to really get clear on like what is it that you actually are doing great and stay with that and then continue to build that as you're opening more schools.
Was it difficult for them to often be able to take some of what you're giving them to replicate? Do they need to lean a lot on you for the support, or were they able to kind of take what you gave them and work on their own to,
Yeah, I think they were able to work on their own. Yeah,
Yeah.
I spent a lot of time with the executive director, which is like the superintendent in the charter school world. And we spent a lot of time just helping her think through what it is that she wanted to do, what her vision was, what her values were, and then just kind of problem solving. So it was a lot of, which is why I moved into executive coaching and leadership coaching, because I had such a great time doing that with her. But it was really, my mission is all, like I said in the bio, it's like my mission has always been to help people really bring out the best version of themselves and to transform education from what they believe is best for education. So she had a really clear vision. She was from the community in East San Jose, and she really wanted to build a school where kids graduated bicultural, biliterate, and bilingual. And so she was really passionate about that. And as a result, it wasn't as hard for her. Once I coached her and helped her kind of bring that out, she was able to execute it really well.
Let's talk a little bit about your podcast. So you host a Changemaker EDU. So it's really about people who want to create change in education. And you talk to people who might be starting schools, creating a change movement, or working in the classroom. So what got you started with this podcast, and is it mostly interview based, and how often does it come out?
Yeah, so it's once a week and it's 2 interviews a month and 2 solo episodes a month. So it's kind of a mix of solo and interview. And I started it because I really felt like when I had done that parenting course, I met all these amazing parents that actually kept asking me, what can I do? A lot of parents, so there were 600 parents in that course across the country. And they had all pretty much had kids, from kindergarten to high school to college. And so they would reach out to me all the time. We had our Facebook group and they would ask me questions like, what am I supposed to do? Like, I'm really worried about having my kid go to the school down the street for XYZ reason, whether it's like they were in an urban community, they were worried about safety, or they were in an affluent community and they're worried about the overachievement and the stress. And so whatever the key issue was, the contextual issue for their community, they were worried about their kids. And so I started thinking like, how can I help people that want to create change in education through the podcast? And then I also would get all these phone calls from teachers and leaders in the space that were asking similar questions. Like, I want to create a different system, but I'm so stuck. And so I just felt like, what if we created a podcast where we could have conversations about how people are creating change, how they're creating change within themselves, how they're doing, individual work to become a better person, and then how they're bringing that passion and vision they have into the change that they want to create. So whether they're, one of my former students is an instructional aide, and he called me after, he graduated in 2010, and he found the podcast, and he called me and he wanted to know, what can I do to create change in my big district system as an instructional aide? And I said, okay, let's talk about that. So anywhere from him and that role to, someone who wants to start a charter school, to my latest venture, which is helping people start micro schools. And I'm really excited about micro schools. We can talk about that, but helping people open a micro school is something that it's not as hard as you think. And those are my most common phone calls now, is like, how do I create a small school in my community to create change quickly?
Yeah, well, we can segue into the micro schools conversation. I did have a guest on, Teresa Sanders, a while back, who had created a micro school during the pandemic. So how is that different when you're coaching somebody to create the micro schools rather than open up a charter?
Yeah, well, the reason I evolved to micro schools was because like I said, I was getting these phone calls from teachers, parents, former students, and educators that are just these amazing educators, and they all wanted to know what they could do. And eventually I started noticing a trend that they feel stuck. They feel stuck by a big bureaucratic system, right? And so one of my clients that who inspired me, she was in one of my leadership programs, the Wise Warrior program, and she's in Martin, South Dakota. And she actually said, I don't know if you do this, but can you help me start a school? And I was like, oh, I actually don't do that, but let's do it. That sounds like great. Like, of course I can help you with that. And that's what kind of launched this. But she started a micro school right outside of the Native American reservation she grew up in rural South Dakota. And it's doing really, really well. It's called Onward Learning. And she inspired me to help others, because what she showed me is that you can actually create a micro school that's like a home-based learning center. So it's almost like, like a homeschool learning center. So it's kind of like homeschooling, but kids are actually in a building. And then there's so much freedom and flexibility to do what you think is best for kids. And so from there, she and I partnered to create Pathfinder, which is an organization that's helping people open micro schools. And we can't even deal with the amount of people that are coming because there's so much interest. And out of that, I realized that one of the problems people have is that they're like, I have this vision for a micro school, but I don't have the curriculum, or I don't know how to get a building. So we're creating a micro school in the box that's Changemaker micro schools, where you can take this and put it into your community and kind of license out the different parts of it, and then choose what works for your context and ensure that your vision is being met. But because your community best. So we're creating a structure where people can actually take a micro school into their community and get it opened as quickly as possible, and get kids enrolled and start changing kids' lives like really fast.
And is that a type of course that people would take online, or is it something they would follow basically written instructions? How does that work for that?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, exactly. It is like, think about it as like a coaching program where you sign up to be. It's basically very similar to what I did with my parenting course, and that's where the idea came from. It's like a year-long cohort. You're in the cohort with other people. You're in a group, and you're all trying to open a micro school in your community. But the difference is we're actually giving you the tools. So then you're deciding like, oh, I want, like, for example, we're working on a mind, body, spirit curriculum, and which is a social emotional learning curriculum, because I've always had a really robust social emotional learning in my schools. And so you can actually take that curriculum and bring it into your community. And then you can work with other people across the country that help you figure out how you're going to implement it. So it's an online program. And then we meet once a year together. And then we're working on trying to get kind of regional groups able to meet in person too.
Yeah, that's really that support around those people who live in separate geographical areas but are meeting online throughout the year. So you talked about wanting to share your message around your leadership vision, basically, and trusting yourself, finding passions. What do you want to say to leaders who might be facing burnout like you did?
Yeah, well, I feel like what I always tell people is that the reason that people are getting burnout is typically because of the system, and because we care so much. And teacher, why you get into teaching? Because you want to help kids, and you're a giver and you're an empath. Typically, you want to help people, and then we burn ourselves out because it's a system that doesn't really allow us to have any space, or teachers just have to take on so many things. And so I really like to tell people, believe in yourself, trust yourself. And this is why I started the podcast. This is why I'm starting the Microschools, organization, is because I believe that the change is going to come from the grassroots, and it's going to come from people on the ground that really understand kids and really understand the communities they're in. And so my vision is that people will start to really understand, like I said, from the inside out, what drives them, what moves them, what makes them super passionate, what their expertise is, what they love. And then they're going to turn that into something in their community. And so I always tell people, whatever that intuitive belief is, or that kind of like nudge, or that feeling you have, maybe it's like, I want to start an after school program, or I want to do a micro school, or I want to start tutoring, or whatever it may be. Even if you're not sure what it is yet, just start to follow it a little bit at a time, just to follow little breadcrumbs, start to see how it all fits together, and eventually you'll end up having something that will be amazing because you're just following your heart.
Yeah, no, that sounds so important. For those who, might think something's not possible, right? Like these ideas that really came to fruition, that you had. So it's finding also the right people to surround yourself with,
Yes.
and finding that network. So we've had a great conversation around your years as a school founder, board member experience, the trench story that happened due to your overworking. Out of everything we've talked about today, what's one thing you'd like listeners to remember?
Yeah, I think the number one thing I want people to remember is what I was just talking about, around that the change in education is going to come from the people on the ground, the people that, not the policymakers. The policymakers are going to follow the people on the ground. Once, like Microschools movement, more and more states are passing legislation where you can get education savings accounts for your family to go and spend it on a microschool. So that happened not because the policymakers had the vision to do that. It's because the families and the teachers and the microschool founders on the ground were creating that. So I feel like the change is going to happen from the bottom up. So let's remember that. And it might feel like, oh, I'm only one person, so how could I create a difference? And it's kind of that maxim that one person can make a difference. So whatever that thing within you is, like why you're here, what your purpose is on this planet, to just cultivate that and take one step forward every single day. And next thing you know, you'll have something really great that you didn't even realize was going to happen.
That's so important to remember. Well, where can people connect with you and find you online?
Yeah, the easiest way to find me is davidkrichards.com, or on LinkedIn. Just look up David K. Richards on LinkedIn. Everything's on my website, and I'm pretty active on LinkedIn.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being on the Out of the Trenches podcast today. It was a pleasure speaking with you about your vision for leadership in schools.
Yeah, thanks for having me.